The morning mist hung low over Norfolk Naval Base as March 5th, 1943, dawned cold and gray. Captain Giles Short stood on the bridge of USS Bogue, reviewing the encrypted message that would change the course of submarine warfare forever. The 10th Fleet's Intelligence Division had intercepted and decoded German naval transmissions through their Ultra program, revealing something extraordinary: the exact positions of multiple U-boat refueling rendezvous points scattered across the Atlantic. Two massive supply submarines, the Milk Cows U-459 and U-487, were scheduled to resupply entire wolfpacks operating along the vital convoy routes that kept Britain alive. The Battle of the Atlantic had evolved into a brutal mathematics of tonnage and time. Both sides understood the grim arithmetic: sink more tonnage than the enemy could build, and victory would follow. Lose submarines faster than they could be replaced, and defeat was inevitable. By March 1943, the German Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm had established terrifying dominance across the Atlantic shipping lanes. Their wolfpacks had sunk over 80 ships, totaling nearly 500,000 tons that month alone. April would see losses surge to more than 600,000 tons, marking the peak of the U-boat offensive that threatened to starve Britain into submission. The numbers seemed to favor Germany decisively. 20 new U-boats entered service each month, while losses averaged fewer than 10. Admiral Karl Dönitz commanded over 400 submarines from his headquarters in occupied France, orchestrating wolfpack tactics that had nearly severed the lifeline between America and Britain. Convoys SC-121 and HX-229 had been savaged in attacks so devastating that Winston Churchill would later write that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. USS Bogue herself was an unlikely weapon against this submarine menace. Displacing 9,800 tons and carrying a complement of 890 men, her flight deck stretched 495 feet, launching 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 9 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. But the carrier's greatest weapons were technologies the Germans didn't yet understand or possess. Centimeter wavelength radar remained invisible to German detection equipment, while high-frequency direction finding gear could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions with devastating accuracy. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery, who would later command Composite Squadron 9 aboard Bogue, was a veteran of Atlantic convoy operations who understood U-boat vulnerabilities with scientific precision. German submarines were most vulnerable during three critical periods: surfacing to charge batteries, meeting supply submarines for fuel and torpedoes, and transmitting radio reports to Dönitz headquarters. German submarine doctrine required frequent radio communication, position reports every 24 hours, contact reports immediately upon sighting convoys, weather observations twice daily, damage assessments after attacks. Aboard U-569, Captain Lieutenant Hans Johansen reviewed his patrol orders with growing unease. 7 weeks at sea had depleted fuel reserves to critical levels, and radio instructions directed him to rendezvous with Milk Cow U-459 at coordinates 50 degrees 40 minutes north, 35 degrees 21 minutes west. Johansen had commanded the submarine since early 1943, taking over from Hans-Peter Hinch, who had led the boat through her earlier, more successful patrols. U-569 was a Type Viek submarine, the workhorse of the German fleet, displacing 769 tons surfaced and 871 tons submerged. The submarine's greatest vulnerability remained unchanged since the Great War. Diesel engines required air for combustion, and electric batteries needed hours of surface charging. A Type Viek could remain submerged for 18 hours at economical speed, but high-speed evasion drained batteries in less than an hour. The American hunter-killer groups exploited these weaknesses with scientific precision, using search patterns calculated to maximize radar coverage, aircraft patrol schedules timed to catch surface submarines, and attack protocols designed to maintain continuous pressure until batteries were exhausted. At 14:20 hours on May 22, 1943, Avenger pilot Lieutenant William Chamberlain detected a surface submarine on radar. Range 18 miles, bearing 90 degrees relative. He pushed the control stick forward and began his attack run, knowing that timing would be everything in the deadly game about to unfold. U-569 was running on the surface at 15 knots, her diesels charging depleted batteries after a night of evasion. The bridge watch spotted the approaching aircraft at 8 miles, and alarm bells rang throughout the boat as Johansen ordered an emergency dive. Crash dive procedures for a type vehicle required 35 seconds from alarm to periscope depth, 35 seconds that would determine whether 44 men lived or died. Ballast tank vents opened with thunderous roars, diesel engines stopped with mechanical finality, and electric motors engaged as the submarine's bow angled sharply downward. Tons of seawater flooded the tanks as Lieutenant Chamberlain's depth charge pattern caught U-569 at shallow depth. 4 Mark 17 depth charges, set for shallow detonation, exploded in perfect sequence around the diving submarine. The explosions damaged U-569 severely, forcing her back to the surface like a wounded whale gasping for air. A second Avenger, piloted by Howard Roberts, was already in position when the submarine reappeared, her hull streaming water and her conning tower scarred by the blast. Roberts attacked immediately but ceased fire when he observed white flags appearing on the submarine's periscope. The crew was surrendering. The Canadian destroyer HMCS St. Laurent was vectored to the scene, but as she approached, Johansen made his final command decision, ordering his crew to scuttle the boat and abandon ship. The capture of survivors from U-569 provided Allied intelligence with valuable insights that would prove devastating to future U-boat operations. During interrogation, German submariners expressed shock at the accuracy of American aircraft attacks. "They knew exactly where we were," one survivor stated, his voice hollow with disbelief. It was as if they could see through the ocean itself. But ultra-intelligence had revealed more than individual submarine positions. Cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park had decoded the entire German naval grid system, identifying patrol areas, wolfpack assembly points, and supply rendezvous coordinates. On June 5, 1943, USS Bogue's aircraft located U-217 charging batteries on the surface 450 miles west of the Azores. Captain Lieutenant Kurt Reichenbach Klinker had commanded the submarine through 3 patrols, sinking 3 ships totaling 10,651 tons, a respectable score in the early war years that now seemed like ancient history. Aircraft from Bogue attacked at dawn, catching U-217 in the vulnerable moments before diving when her batteries were nearly depleted and her crew was exhausted from hours of submerged operations. The first Avenger's depth charges damaged the submarine's diving mechanism, leaving her trapped on the surface like a sitting duck. Unable to submerge, Reichenbach Klinker ordered his gun crews to engage the attacking aircraft while damage control teams worked desperately to repair the diving planes. The surface engagement lasted 18 minutes of pure hell, with U-217's 88mm deck gun and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons firing over 300 rounds at aircraft specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. One Wildcat sustained minor damage from shell fragments, but the submarine was fighting a losing battle against overwhelming odds. An Avenger from Bogue's squadron delivered the killing blow with depth charges that bracketed the submarine perfectly, the explosions destroying U-217's pressure hull in multiple locations. The submarine sank with all 50 hands, including Reichenbach Klinker, disappearing beneath an expanding oil slick that marked her grave. No survivors were recovered from the dark waters that had become the graveyard of so many U-boats. By June 1943, 5 hunter-killer groups were operating in the Atlantic, each centered on an escort carrier with destroyer escort screens. USS Bogue, USS Card, USS Core, USS Santee, and USS Croatan represented an industrial capacity that Germany could never match, no matter how many U-boats her shipyards produced. USS Card, commanded by Captain Arnold "Buster" Isbell, would become one of the most successful hunter-killer groups of the war. Between July and October 1943, Card's group would account for 8 confirmed U-boat kills, earning the first Presidential Unit Citation awarded to a hunter-killer group. The techniques developed by Card's team became standard doctrine throughout the fleet. Aircraft would patrol in expanding box patterns from the carrier's position. Surface radar contacts triggered immediate attacks, and submarines that crash-dived were marked with dye markers and pursued by destroyer escorts using hedgehog mortars and depth charges. The systematic nature of these operations represented a new form of warfare, one where industrial capacity and technological superiority trumped individual skill and courage. On August 7, 1943, Card's aircraft located Milk Cow U-117 refueling U-66 on the surface, both submarines caught in the most vulnerable possible situation. The supply submarine was trapped with fuel hoses still connected, making crash dive impossible. Lieutenant Charles Stapler's Avenger attacked immediately, dropping 4 depth charges that straddled U-117 with devastating precision. The explosion of over 400 tons of diesel fuel created a pillar of fire visible from 30 miles away, a funeral pyre that announced to every U-boat commander in the Atlantic that the rules of the game had changed forever. U-66 managed to crash dive, but was damaged by the blast, escaping this encounter only to meet her fate 9 months later in one of the war's most unusual battles. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Barkston, commanding U-5-121, witnessed the destruction of U-117 from periscope depth, and his war diary captured the shock felt by U-boat commanders throughout the fleet. The Americans appear everywhere simultaneously. Their aircraft arrive without warning. Their weapons are impossibly accurate. We are no longer hunters, but the hunted. October 1943 marked a turning point that would define the remainder of the Atlantic War. The U-boat arm lost 23 submarines that month, including several veteran commanders who had survived since 1939. Each loss represented irreplaceable experience that training schools could not replicate, knowledge gained through years of combat that died with the boats on the ocean floor. The destruction of Milk Cow submarines proved particularly catastrophic. U-488, U-489, and U-490 were all sunk within weeks of each other, eliminating the refueling capability that allowed Type V boats to reach the American coast. Without Milk Cows, patrol areas contracted to the mid-Atlantic, where hunter-killer groups waited in growing numbers like patient predators. USS Core's hunter-killer group refined the doctrine of continuous air coverage, maintaining aircraft over suspected U-boat zones for days at a time, exhausting submarine batteries through relentless pursuit. This technique proved devastatingly effective against even the most experienced commanders, turning the ocean into a transparent battlefield where hiding was impossible. On October 13, 1943, Core's group caught U-378 on the surface at dawn. The submarine's commander, Oberleutnant Xerxes Georg Eich, had just celebrated his 26th birthday, a celebration that proved tragically premature. His inexperience showed in his response to the attack, attempting to fight on the surface rather than crash diving immediately. 4 Wildcats strafed U-378, while 2 Avengers positioned for depth charge runs, the submarine's anti-aircraft gunners managing to damage 1 Wildcat before being swept from the conning tower by machine gun fire. Captain Lieutenant Rolf Heinrich Hoffmann commanded U-405 through 7 successful war patrols, his experience and tactical skill keeping his crew alive through encounters that had destroyed lesser boats. He had developed techniques for evading aircraft using cloud cover and rain squalls to mask his submarine's position, innovations born of desperate necessity in an increasingly hostile ocean. On October 31, 1943, U-405 was operating with wolfpack Siegfried when USS Card's hunter-killer group arrived in the patrol area like avenging angels of death. In the darkness and heavy seas, the 2 vessels collided in a scene from maritime hell. Bore's bow rode up onto U-405's forward deck, locking the ships together in deadly embrace. For several minutes it seemed like hours, crews fired machine guns, pistols, and threw hand grenades at point-blank range. American sailors hurled coffee mugs, shell casings, and in one desperate case, a sheath knife at German gunners only yards away. The surreal combat continued until the vessels separated, leaving both ships damaged and their crews shaken by the intimacy of the violence. Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins, Bore's captain, ordered all weapons to bear on the submarine as it attempted to escape into the darkness. Over 4,000 rounds of ammunition were expended as U-405 fought for her life, the submarine's conning tower riddled with holes, her deck gun destroyed, and her hull punctured below the waterline. Hoffman ordered abandoned ship as U-405 settled by the stern, taking with her the dreams of German naval supremacy. Only 8 of the 49 crew members survived the freezing Atlantic. Hoffman was not among them, going down with his boat as captains had done for centuries. The technological revolution, enabling hunter-killer success, extended far beyond radar and homing torpedoes. Operations research scientists had developed optimal search patterns using probability theory. Acoustic analysis could distinguish individual submarine propeller signatures, and statistical models predicted U-boat behavior based on thousands of observations. High-frequency direction finding proved particularly devastating. German submarine doctrine required regular radio reports to coordinate wolfpack attacks, but each transmission lasted only seconds before Allied stations triangulated positions within a 2-mile radius. U-boat commanders faced an impossible choice: maintain radio silence and lose tactical coordination, or transmit and reveal their position to hunter-killer groups that never slept. The Germans believed their Enigma encryption system remained secure, unaware that captured codebooks from U-559 in October 1942 had allowed British cryptanalysts to break the 4-rotor M4 cipher. Every operational order from Dönitz to his submarines was being read by Allied intelligence within hours of transmission, turning German naval communications into death warrants for their own boats. December 1943 saw the destruction of several veteran U-boats that had survived since the war's early days, their experienced crews finally overwhelmed by forces they could not comprehend or counter. U-172, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Hermann Hoffmann, had sunk 26 ships totaling 151,000 tons. Her crew was considered elite, having developed innovative tactics for penetrating escort screens that had worked brilliantly in 1941 and 1942, but were now obsolete against modern detection methods. Within 2 hours, 3 more aircraft had arrived to maintain contact, beginning a 14-hour ordeal that would end only with the submarine's destruction. U-172 played a desperate game of survival, surfacing briefly to ventilate the boat before crash diving when radar detected approaching aircraft. At 0800 hours on December 14th, with batteries exhausted and compressed air reserves depleted, Hoffmann had no choice but to surface and remain surfaced, trapped like a wounded animal awaiting the final blow. U-172's anti-aircraft guns engaged the circling aircraft while damage control teams attempted futile repairs, but the surface battle lasted only 43 minutes against overwhelming firepower. Destroyer escorts USS George E. Badger, USS Clemson, USS DuPont, and USS Osmond Ingram converged on the submarine's position, firing over 400 rounds from their main batteries. U-172's hull was penetrated in 17 locations before she finally sank, taking 46 of her 57 crew members to the bottom. 13 survivors were pulled from the water, their testimony revealing the depth of despair among U-boat crews. The ocean has become a trap. We cannot hide. We cannot run. Young, inexperienced commanders were being sent to sea with minimal training, their boats crewed by teenagers who had never seen combat. Oberleutnant Zur C. Wolfgang Hader, commanding U-434, was 23 years old with less than 6 months of submarine experience when Card's aircraft caught his boat on the surface in March 1944. He ordered his crew to fight rather than dive, a fatal decision born of inexperience that resulted in the loss of all hands and another entry in the growing ledger of German naval defeat. The quality gap between American and German forces widened with each engagement like a chasm that could never be bridged. American pilots accumulated hundreds of hours of anti-submarine patrol experience. Radar operators learned to distinguish submarine signatures from surface clutter at maximum range, and acoustic operators could identify individual U-boats by their distinctive propeller sounds, tracking specific boats across thousands of miles of ocean. German submarine crews, conversely, were becoming younger and less capable with each passing month. Admiral Dönitz's son Peter exemplified this tragic trend. The younger Dönitz served aboard U-954 as a watch officer, part of the new generation of submariners thrown into combat before they were ready. On May 19, 1943, the submarine was caught on the surface by British escorts and sunk with all hands, including the Admiral's son. The loss did not deter Dönitz from sending other young men to similar fates, but it underscored the personal cost of the failing U-boat campaign and the terrible mathematics of modern warfare. On May 6, 1944, USS Bogue demonstrated the intensity of hunter-killer operations in one of the war's most bizarre encounters. The destroyer escort located U-66 on the surface west of the Cape Verde Islands, her commander Oberleutnant Xerxes Gerhard Seehausen having led the submarine through 9 patrols and 33 ships sunk. His experience meant nothing against the forces arrayed against him. Industrial capacity and technological superiority had replaced individual skill as the determining factor in naval combat. Unable to dive due to battery depletion, U-66 attempted to ram Bogue in a desperate final gambit. The two vessels collided at 15 knots, their hulls grinding together in the darkness while German and American sailors exchanged small arms fire at point-blank range. The surreal combat included sailors throwing coffee mugs, shell casings, and hand grenades between the vessels, but Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel's crew held every advantage. They fired 105 3-inch shells, 2,700 rounds of 20mm ammunition, and 418 rounds of 40mm shells in 16 minutes, perforating U-66's hull in dozens of locations. The capture of U-505 on June 4, 1944, by Captain Daniel Gallery's hunter-killer group from USS Guadalcanal represented the ultimate demonstration of American dominance. The boarding party from destroyer escort USS Pillsbury descended through U-505's conning tower while the submarine was still underway, seawater flooding through damaged valves. They closed the valves, stopped the flooding, and saved the submarine from sinking, the first enemy warship captured by the U.S. Navy since 1815. By August 1944, Dönitz ordered the evacuation of French bases as Allied armies approached, but U-boats attempting to reach Norwegian ports faced continuous attack from hunter-killer groups positioned along their route like wolves waiting for sheep. Of 31 boats that attempted the passage, 11 were destroyed before reaching safety. The survivors arrived with extensive damage and exhausted crews, their testimony adding to the growing evidence that the U-boat war was lost beyond any hope of recovery. The introduction of the snorkel breathing tube allowed submarines to run diesels while submerged at periscope depth, but this innovation came too late and proved inadequate against modern detection methods. Snorkel-equipped boats were still vulnerable to radar detection and could only make 6 knots while using the device. It represented a defensive adaptation rather than a return to offensive capability, the technological equivalent of adding armor to a sinking ship. The final months of 1944 saw U-boat losses reach unsustainable levels that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. November brought 24 boats lost. December, 27 boats lost. New construction could not keep pace with destruction, training facilities were bombed, fuel supplies dwindled, and the U-boat force was dying while everyone pretended otherwise. Yet Dönitz continued to send boats to sea, driven by Hitler's demands and his own refusal to accept the reality of defeat. The story of U-396 exemplified this final phase of systematic destruction. Her commander, Oberleutnant Xerxes Ernst Gunther Heineck, and his entire crew averaged 20 years of age, children sent to die in a war already lost. They sailed from Norway in November 1944 and were detected by USS Core's hunter-killer group within 3 days. The pursuit lasted 18 hours, a relentless chase that could have only one ending. When U-396 finally surfaced, her batteries dead and air exhausted, she was immediately destroyed by waiting aircraft. There were no survivors to tell the tale of another young crew sacrificed to the mathematics of modern warfare. The statistics told the complete story of transformation and defeat. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships, totaling 6.2 million tons, bringing Britain to the brink of starvation. In 1944, they sank 132 ships, totaling 773,000 tons, a reduction in effectiveness of 90%. The hunter-killer groups had reversed the tonnage war's arithmetic, and at peak production, American shipyards launched over 140 Liberty ships per month, nearly 3 every 2 days, each carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. The mathematics had become impossible for Germany to overcome. The final humiliation came in April 1945 when U-546 attacked USS Frederick C. Davis, part of USS Bogue's screen. The destroyer Escort sank, but within hours U-546 was hunted down and destroyed by the remaining escorts with the methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire campaign. It was the last U-boat killed by Bogue's hunter-killer group, bringing her total to 13 submarines destroyed and closing the book on the most successful anti-submarine campaign in naval history. USS Bogue ended the war as the most successful hunter-killer group with 13 confirmed U-boat kills. USS Card claimed 11. USS Core destroyed 6. These escort carriers and their screens had sunk more submarines than traditional fleet units could have imagined possible. But their greatest achievement was not in numbers but in methodology. They had demonstrated that modern warfare would belong to nations capable of integrating intelligence, technology, and industrial production into unified combat systems. The human cost was staggering beyond comprehension and would forever mark the price of Germany's gamble for naval supremacy. Of 40,000 German submariners who went to war, 30,000 never returned, a casualty rate of 75% that exceeded even the Western Front in World War I. 784 of 1,162 commissioned U-boats were destroyed, their steel hulls becoming monuments to the effectiveness of systematic warfare. The loss rate for boats on their first patrol exceeded 50% by war's end, meaning that most crews died before they could even learn their trade. Entire graduating classes from U-boat school were wiped out within months of completing training, their young lives sacrificed to a campaign that had been lost before they ever went to sea. American losses, by contrast, were minimal. The hunter-killer groups lost only one escort carrier in the Atlantic USS Block Island, torpedoed in May 1944, and fewer than 10 destroyer escorts throughout the entire campaign. The exchange ratio that had once favored U-boats by 10-1 had reversed to favor the Americans by 20-1. The tactical innovations developed by hunter-killer groups influenced naval warfare for decades, their lessons studied in naval academies around the world. The integration of air and surface assets, the use of intelligence to direct operations, and the application of operational research to optimize tactics all became standard doctrine in modern navies. The Cold War's anti-submarine warfare relied heavily on lessons learned in the Atlantic, where American ingenuity had first demonstrated the power of systematic thinking applied to warfare. But perhaps the most profound impact was psychological, reaching far beyond naval circles to influence military thinking across all branches of service. The U-boat force had represented German naval power and technological prowess, the cutting edge of military innovation that had dominated the seas for 3 years. Its destruction by American hunter-killer groups demonstrated that industrial capacity and scientific advancement would determine future conflicts, not individual heroism or tactical brilliance. The age of romantic warfare had yielded to the era of systematic destruction. In May 1945, as Germany surrendered unconditionally, the remaining U-boats received Dönitz final order with the weight of absolute defeat. Surface, fly black flags, and proceed to Allied ports for surrender. Of the 49 boats that complied with this humiliating directive, many were commanded by officers younger than 25, their crews composed of teenagers who had never seen combat beyond training exercises. They surrendered to hunter-killer groups that had been preparing to destroy them with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire campaign, a efficiency so complete that it had rendered German resistance meaningless. The last operational U-boat patrol ended on May 7, 1945, when U-320 was sunk by British escorts in the final act of submarine warfare. Her commander, Oberleutnant Sir C. Helmut Emmerich, was 24 years old when he and his entire crew of 36 men became the final casualties of a force that had once threatened to change the war's outcome. They died as symbols of a military revolution that had transformed naval warfare from an art into a science, from individual combat into industrial destruction. Post-war analysis revealed the elegant efficiency of hunter-killer operations with mathematical precision that would have been impossible during the chaotic years of combat. Search patterns had been optimized using probability theory. Weapon delivery was calculated to maximize kill probability while minimizing ammunition expenditure, and communication intercepts were correlated with operational patterns to predict U-boat behavior with startling accuracy. Every element had been refined through rigorous analysis and practical application, creating a weapon system that was both scientifically precise and devastatingly effective. This reversal occurred not through any single technological breakthrough that could be copied or counted, but through the systematic integration of multiple advantages that created an overwhelming superiority impossible to overcome. Radar that could detect submarines day or night, aircraft that could patrol for hours hundreds of miles from base, weapons that could find targets regardless of evasion attempts, intelligence that revealed enemy intentions before they were executed, and industrial capacity that could replace losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. These advantages combined into a force that was greater than the sum of its parts. The hunter-killer groups had written the first chapter of modern naval warfare, where victory was determined not by individual courage or skill, qualities both sides possessed in abundance, but by systematic superiority across multiple domains. They had transformed the Atlantic from a vast hiding place where submarines could operate with relative impunity into a transparent battlefield where every movement was observed, every transmission intercepted, and every mistake punished with swift and certain destruction. Admiral Dönitz would spend 10 years in Spandau prison as a war criminal, contemplating the destruction of the force he had built and led with such confidence. His post-war memoirs contained a telling passage that acknowledged the fundamental change in warfare's nature. I had believed that courage and determination could overcome material disadvantage, that superior seamanship and tactical innovation could defeat superior numbers and technology. The American hunter-killer groups taught me that in modern war, technology and industrial capacity are decisive. We were not defeated by better sailors, but by better systems. The legacy of the hunter-killer groups extends far beyond their wartime achievements, influencing military doctrine and strategic thinking for decades after the guns fell silent. They demonstrated that future naval warfare would be determined by the integration of air and surface forces, the fusion of intelligence with operations, and the application of scientific methodology to tactical problems. The nuclear submarines of the Cold War, equipped with sophisticated sensors and weapons that could track targets across entire ocean basins, were direct descendants of the concepts proven by escort carriers and destroyer escorts in the Atlantic. The young men who commanded these doomed vessels had entered service believing they were joining an elite force that would determine the war's outcome through skill, courage, and technological superiority. They discovered instead that they were facing an enemy who had transformed warfare itself, replacing the art of individual combat with the science of systematic destruction. Their shock at this transformation echoed through the ranks of the U-boat force and ultimately through naval history itself, marking the moment when industrial warfare finally replaced the romantic notions of individual heroism that had dominated military thinking for centuries. The final statistics were irrefutable and spoke to a transformation so complete that it redefined naval warfare for the modern age. The hunter-killer groups and their allied counterparts had sunk 784 German U-boats, killed 30,000 German submariners while losing fewer than 5,000 of their own men, and reduced the U-boat threat from near victory to complete defeat in less than 2 years. It was not merely a military victory, but a demonstration that the nature of warfare itself had fundamentally changed in ways that would influence military thinking for generations to come. The era of the lone wolf submarine operating independently through stealth and cunning had ended forever in the depths of the Atlantic. The future belonged to integrated naval forces employing sophisticated sensors, weapons, and intelligence in coordinated operations that left no room for individual heroics to overcome systematic disadvantage. The hunter-killer groups had not just won the Battle of the Atlantic, they had revolutionized naval warfare and shocked their enemies with the completeness of their transformation from hunted to hunter, from desperate defenders to methodical executioners of an entire military philosophy.